Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach, and today we have with us Steve Cruice, who's the owner of Simply Steward Financial Planning. Steve, welcome to the program.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me on today.
Hey, you're welcome. Give us a little bit of background on your entrepreneurial journey. What led you into financial services, and then what led you to one day think, you know what, let me start my own firm?
Sure. Yeah. So I started out as an auditor, got my CPA license, and worked for one of the big firms. And I audited a lot of different companies, but primarily companies in the financial services industry. And I really just loved the industry. I thought it was interesting. So I spent a few years doing that, and then had the opportunity to work for one of my auditing clients. They were a large financial services company. They did insurance, annuities, investments. And so I went and worked with them, their corporate headquarters, and got involved in many different areas of the business. And over time, just realized where my passion was leading me was I was working in the corporate environment, and I was working with, my colleagues, but really started to have this desire to work one-on-one with people and help them with their money. And so I got some additional education, did the CFP coursework, and started to figure out what the next step was. And so I looked around and tried to find a firm that maybe, aligned with what I was looking to do. I wanted to do very in-depth planning. I had a tax focus. So I was looking for a firm like that. And the types of firms that I was coming across that did things the way that I wanted to do it were typically smaller firms and just weren't hiring. And so I connected with a group called the Alliance of Comprehensive Planners. It's a voluntary-led nonprofit group of independent advisory firm owners. And so connected with them, and they helped walk me through the process of establishing an independent practice. And so that was in early of 2017, and have been doing it ever since. And just really love helping people, figure out what it is that they want to do with this life and how money plays a role in that.
You were going through the progression of I knew what I wanted, and then I couldn't find it because this type of firm and that type of firm, and then I found some firms that were close to what I want, but they were smaller, and then they weren't high. So I just did it myself. So what your progression there reminds me of when you watch Shark Tank, and they're like, "How did you come up with this?" And they're like, "Well, we had this problem. We looked and looked and looked. It wasn't out there, so we just created it." So I love that mindset. And you said the word auditor, and that all of a sudden, I'm sure with many people, makes people's pit in their stomach, flare up and go, "Ooh, auditing, IRS audit or audit." So the question I have is around that is, was that an auditing position where you were actually going in, doing an audit, like let's go dig in and find something wrong? Or was it kind of like the auditing where it's like a pre-audit to something just to make sure everything's, really on track? And hey, here's a little punch list of things you should keep in mind. Was it that internal kind of an audit?
It was, so we would go in, and we would, companies would put together their financial statements, quarterly or annually. And we would go in, and it'd be our job to put the stamp of approval on that, so that they could send that out to their investors, and, banks, things like that. But where it was really interesting for me is I had to have an understanding of their products. I had to have an understanding of how they made money. I had to have just a pretty in-depth understanding of how the businesses operated, these financial services, businesses. And so that's really where my interest level grew, was just because I was just getting a lot of exposure to what they did, how they did it, and why they did it.
Well, and the interesting thing I would suspect is that you would hear maybe through your intro pleasantries with the company, oh, hey, what do you guys do? And they would tell you like their little corporate brand talk and marketing, and then you dig into the actual numbers, and it's like, okay, now we're seeing what the real story is, positive or negative. I'm sure you saw some red flags, and I'm sure you saw some things like, hey, this looks really good, and maybe there's, numbers don't lie, as they say. So I think that's a really neat picture there that really spurred your interest to get into financial services. So let's move into who you actually work with. I'm sure you work with individuals, and then I also know that you work with business owners. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits of both the personal, individual or family that works with an advisor, as well as then if that person owns a business, what are some of the benefits that way?
Yeah, so I primarily work with two groups, like you mentioned. One is the entrepreneur that's typically a sole owner, or maybe there's one other partner, and typically a closely held business. So those entrepreneurs, and the biggest benefit for them is they're so busy. And I know a lot of listeners to your podcast are also entrepreneurs, and and being an entrepreneur myself, it's very easy to get just really focused on the day-to-day, running the business, growing the business. And what can happen many times is once the business starts, generating some good cash flow, and the owner is making a good income, they're busier than ever. And what tends to happen is they're not as intentional on preparing for their future financially, because their whole focus is on running the business, which is where it should be. But they just don't have the time to get everything in order or manage on the personal side. Things like, researching investments, keeping up with the tax code, trying to minimize taxes, planning for the future, and, taking a look at how does risk. Our largest assets typically are our businesses. And so, there's a lot of benefit to that. Concentration of investment can build wealth much more quickly, but there's also risk there too. So trying to figure out what's the appropriate amount of risk there, and how do we diversify some of that away from the business if something were to happen. So those are the big things, I think, on the entrepreneur side. And then the other group are people that are within about 5 years of making, I don't really like the word retirement, but that's the word that we use. And so making that transition to a different stage of life after, maybe it's another career, maybe I'm going to stop working, but typically people within about 5 years of making that kind of a transition. And, for them, the big benefit is usually they want to be doing other stuff. And so they want to spend less time on managing a portfolio, tax planning, insurance planning, all the different financial needs. They just want to be enjoying, the time that they have, and doing the things that are most important to them. And there's a lot of opportunities in retirement, as far as there's a lot of opportunity to minimize taxes and where you pull that income from, which do you pull it from a Roth account, a traditional account, a taxable account, how much each year so you don't run out. What are the different tools to make that last the longest it can? And then there's just a lot of opportunities for tax planning as well.
Yeah.
There tends to be
they're like, do you pull it out of? And the answer to those questions are, it all depends. And I think that's the whole point is, man alive, everybody is different, and your stage of life and your goals and all of these things that people want to aspire to. And I love your perspective on retirement. It's not necessarily, okay, I'm done, drop the mic and I'm finished. It's just a different stage of life, because statistically more and more people are, just moving from one type of career to another. And yeah, they're cutting back and traveling more, but it's no longer, in my opinion, give me the gold watch and I'm going to go play golf every day, or I'm going to go sit on the beach every day, because people are wired differently and their goals change. And I love how on your website you focus in much of your packages and talk on goals. It's almost like being a life planner. Yeah, money, of course, that's a part of it, but what do you want? What do you personally want out of life for your business, for yourself, your family? And then let's make sure that the money side of things will allow you to get there.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And retirement is actually a relatively new concept. This idea of retirement started in the late 1800s over in with Otto von Bismarck in Prussia. And he came up with this program that, hey, workers that hit age 70, we're going to help them out, and they can kind of step away from some of the very long hours and very labor intensive work that they did. And at that time, the life expectancy was around 70. And so people really didn't live that much past retirement. Well, if we fast forward to today, somebody that retires at 65, which we think of as a traditional retirement age, in a married couple, there's a 50% chance that one of them is going to live past 90.
Wow.
And so we've now gone from maybe a couple years of retirement to today where that phase of life could be 25 to 30 years. And so it really changes how people are thinking about this next stage of life.
Yeah, that's really huge because, like as an example, what you just said is people are living longer. Well, not only are they living longer, but they want to do in my research and reading, they want to do more with their life, more meaningful things with their life. And I think that a lot of times people are in the stages of life, like, we've got young kids and now the kids are in college and, now they're married. And then now, and there's monetary needs for those, of course. I've got, my kids are, 3 are in college and 1 is senior in high school. So it's like, wow, there's some monetary needs there. But when you get to the point and you feel like your day is just, packed. And when you get to the point of, okay, I'm contributing to family, I'm contributing to my career, whether it's corporate or self-employed, and then you get to that stage where is traditionally thought of as retirement or what can I do for the next stage, people feel like I still want to contribute. Otherwise, you have this lack or this, I where's my purpose? And I think that now becomes the aspect of, why don't you take that intellectual capital or your passions or your desires, or what kind of goals can you then pour into still staying busy? It's just that you're not going to be up at the crack of dawn working, 10, 12-hour days. So talk a little bit about what you're finding your clients doing in this stage of life. Now, again, this makes the need that, hey, please don't go to a financial professional asking for retirement type advice at age 2 years before you want to do it. I mean, you got to think of these things years and years ahead so that it gives time for these strategies to take place. But once that's the case, what are you finding your clients needing and doing in that stage of their life?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it's I don't think clients realize it can be a very big, a lot of times we just focus on, if I hit this number, I can retire.
Yeah.
If I hit this number, I can retire. But then when I actually start sitting down and talking with like a new client about this idea, this transition that's coming up for them, they really haven't thought, many of them have not thought through what a whole day looks like. So it's very easy. I mean, typically sit down and there's usually, they've thought it in general terms. So they might say, we want to spend more time with family and we want to volunteer more with our church, or we want to do this or that. And so they have a few, we want to do some traveling, which is great. But then you start digging down and having them construct like a typical day. And once you get through, okay, you want to travel, what does that mean? And we want to take 2 trips a year. Okay, well there's 3 weeks of your time or 4 weeks of your time. And then, volunteering in the church, how often do you anticipate doing that? Well, maybe, once every couple of weeks or so. And, we go down the list and we figure out that they really have not accounted for very much of their time, even with the ideas of the things they want to do. And so I think that tends to be an eye-opening moment when they realize, wow, this is a lot of time especially for people that have been doing, 40 to 50 hour weeks for the past 30 years.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they're confronted with, even if I'm doing a lot of the stuff that I've dreamed of doing and that I am passionate about, there's still a lot of time here. And so that's where we start going deeper and really, and I've developed it's called the Steward 360 process to kind of walk my clients through how to make, how are you going to spend your time going forward during this transition period.
Now, the numbers 360 give me the impression of a holistic, full, not just this one sliver, but a whole 360-degree view of your life, your money, and all the things that impact it. And I don't know anything about the Steward 360, but am I close to the mark there?
Yeah. So the Steward 360 process, I was looking in Ecclesiastes. Solomon, we think, wrote that book of the Bible, and it's just very eye-opening because he kind of talks about he could pretty much do anything. He had the ultimate, if he wanted it, he had the ultimate American retirement dream. But he said, it wasn't fulfilling, really, and ultimately his conclusion was we were designed for something higher. We have a higher purpose, and that's what we're designed to do. That's where we find fulfillment. And so the Steward 360 process that I walk through tries to help, unearth some of that with my clients in this stage of life. And the first step is, just an assessment phase. Assess. So this looks at what kinds of talents do you have? What kind of personality traits, passions that you have, just really taking a look at who am I and what are the things that are important to me. There are a lot of tools to kind of assess those things, but that's a very first important step at really just looking, at the inside and who they are, and really not only. It's the first step a lot of times where the first time where people have this opportunity, maybe where they're starting to get close to financial independence, where they're starting to have to think about themselves outside of what they've done for the last 30 or 40 years. Many times that's becomes our identity, what we do and what we have done. And so really taking a step back and helping them understand that's a piece of who you are, but what's the whole picture here? So that's the assess phase. And then the envision phase. So this is just helping them start to envision how they're going to spend their time, incorporating the results from the assess phase. And I think it's important to, I don't encourage people to just work until they die, but we are designed to, I believe, continue to serve and have an impact, and we find fulfillment in that. And so, incorporating in that envision phase, incorporate some times of, utilizing your talents and your passions to serve others, but then also incorporating, times of rest, relaxation. So there's a balance and trying to help people in that visioning stage, that envision stage, to try to figure out what is that balance for them and how they're going to spend that time, and realizing, again, emphasizing that this is a lot of time, 25, 30 years. Even if you do play a ton of golf, there's still a ton of time. And so really thinking through that as part of the envision phase. And then finally, it's the realize stage. So we've assessed who they are, what's important, what their talents are. We've helped them envision how they're going to spend their time. And then the realize is let's make this happen. Money is just a tool. If somebody that dies with $1 billion or somebody that dies with $0, it doesn't matter at that point. And so it's just a tool that we have to manage in this life. And so we that's where the financial planning comes in. So now we're gonna utilize strategies and planning to make sure that your money is working the hardest it can to achieve what you envisioned in the envision stage.
Yeah, what you just
and sometimes that's not maximizing wealth. Sometimes
100%.
it's actually reducing wealth. So
yeah. Well, sometimes, like I've even I read a book recently, and this person was talking about their fulfillment in their life, and they were like, you know what, it's not about money. In fact, I found myself being led to give away most of it to church and missions and causes that way. And the person said, I ended up living on 10% of my income. And this was, I remember the first time I heard that was R.J. LaTurna from, he has a college down in Texas, and he was in, I think, heavy machinery. But now all of a sudden, it's not about all the money you can make and what you can do with it. It's, maybe I'm going to make a whole bunch of money, because if you only live on 10%, then, boy, that 10% better pay the bills. But the point is, it really is not about the dollar figure. It's about what that can allow you to do. And then it's just getting those values aligned there. Your process sounds just spectacular. It makes me think of something, and I'll make this the final question. There's, when you have a conversation with a group of people, or have people over for dinner party, some of the taboo topics that you never want to talk about is, religion or politics, or how much do you weigh? How old are you? All those things. Well, some of those topics are like, hey, so how much money do you make? So I think that finances, what you do for a living, and you're digging into people's life, those are sensitive topics. And yes, it's powerful and necessary, but it makes me think that you've got, in the state of Colorado and in the United States, you've got a competitor or 1,000 or two, right? This is a competitive industry. So talk about the importance of developing trust in the financial services professional that you're looking, maybe someone is looking for one, or needing a second opinion. How do they pick you? What sets you apart in that respect? And what are some things that people should be looking for to have the confidence and trust in that professional?
Yeah. I think, and I know I'd love to, you probably have some great insights on this, Mike, but in my opinion, when it comes to trust, I think, there's like a baseline, which I think is just a minimum standard, and that's, credentials, just illustrating, hey, I'm going to, or I've put in the work to show people that I've studied this and I know this topic. So such as, I have in our industry, it might be the CPA license, certified financial planner. And there's a host of other credentials. Those are just the two that I have. But there's many others out there that just show that you're dedicated to continuing education, learning. You're voluntarily submitting yourself to accountability by different bodies that do those credentials. So I think that's a piece of it. I think how a business is structured. So trying to structure business so that it is one that makes it easier to trust. So I try to be very transparent with costs and fees and all of that with my clients, so that there's no surprises, there's nothing hidden. They kind of know everything up front. And so I think just how that's structured, how fees and all that are structured is important for trust. And then, I think it is true that even if you have all the knowledge and expertise, people don't trust you until they really they get to know you, and they know that you care about them. And so really just spending a lot of time, I try to spend the first several meetings just listening. I really don't provide a lot of advice. It's just really trying to get to know them, trying to understand where they're at, what's important to them, and just let them know that, hey, listen, I care about you, whether you work with me or not. We're going to try to make sure that you're taken care of. So I think those are in my opinion, a few components around trying to build trust into a business that, financial advisors, one of the least trusted professions in the U.S. So we've got a lot of work to do. I think as an industry, we're making a lot of progress, but I think there's still a lot to be done.
Yeah, really, really good points there, Steve. And so let's wrap up with what's the best way that someone could reach out, connect with you, learn more about your Stewardship 360 process, and get to know you.
Yeah, just the best way would just be visit the website at www.simplysteward.com. And then at the bottom of the first page there is a schedule an intro call. And so it's just a 15-minute call, and we can talk about any needs that someone might have. And then there's also resources on the website that they can look through and get a feel for more for what I do.
Excellent. Well, Steve, thank you so much for coming on. It was a real pleasure chatting with you, and I'll make sure to have the link for simplysteward.com in the show notes so that can take listeners right to your website. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.